inside my head. I try to turn it down, but I can't quite drown it out. I'm tortured every day.
Hey y'all, thanks for joining us today. You're listening to Society Bites Radio, and I'm your host, Dr. Richard Himmer.
And I'm Sherry Himmer, and this is Authentically You, social interaction for the mind and soul.
For the next 25 minutes, we're going to continue the conversation on trigger busters.
And we're going to get back to Bobby and Brenda and do a take two for Bobby.
Right, and we're going to move off to the rational mind. We're going to cover expectation A and B, and if time permits, we're going to talk about a story I had about my sister wanting to kill my mother.
Yeah, we're going to put a rational brain into Bobby and see how it looks with him in that state.
So this is where we left off. Our protagonist was in his room sulking, and he got a phone call. He had fully expected that he was going to be dumped, that his girlfriend was seeing somebody else. And so he went off into his isolation. He went from triggered to flood. Therefore, he's going to get the consequences of that. He missed his dinner. He worried twice. He was worried about something that never happened, fully engaged in prediction error.
But let's take his rational brain and put the facts back in there. So Bobby and Brenda had been dating for 13 months. Brenda went to the university out of state 3 months ago. They were in frequent contact while she was away. There were no indications that she was dating anyone at the university. She drove home for Christmas break and shared her excitement to see Bobby again. And she arrived home safely about the time she indicated when Bobby noticed her car to verify she was home in the driveway across the street.
So on a rational side, he's going to go cue, respond, result. That's the rational brain approach.
So he notices her car.
Right.
That's the cue.
He knows she's home.
Yeah.
What else does she know?
Well, it's a 16-hour drive, and she's been in the car since yesterday after finals. She's probably tired.
Okay, so let's go over the logical possibilities for behavior at this point.
And I just want to insert that with a rational brain, you can actually be a little more empathetic. I mean, if you go back to where he was irrational, it was all about his own feelings, right?
Well, what comes first, empathy or the rational brain?
Well, rational brain opens the possibility for you to think outside of yourself and to be empathetic, to think, what if? What if she's tired?
I'd like to make the case for the fact that if you practice empathy, it creates a rational brain.
Oh, I do like that. It keeps you in that rational
What if the
state.
MO is automatically to go to empathy? Let's look at it through her eyes right now. What's going on? What is it like for her?
I'm just saying, but then there's that one step even further, and you become an empath with you irrationally over-expect people's feelings. But
that's well said, but if you just learn empathy is not the same as an empath,
right?
That you're not to take on the feelings and emotions because you lose neutrality. You move to bias.
Okay. So what are the logical possibilities for her behavior at this point?
So let's think about it. What's going on? 16-hour drive.
This is Bobby's rational brain talking.
So
she could be resting.
She could be resting. What else could she be doing? It's Christmas time, right?
She could be helping her family.
And
she could be unpacking.
Right.
She could be doing her laundry because she couldn't do it last week during finals. She could be visiting with people that have just arrived at their home from out of town.
So there's family, friends. At Christmas time, it's a constant hustle and bustle of everything going on. So instead of assuming the worst by allowing these shadows to surface, Bobby has the ability to pre-plan options available before they became available. In other words, he can get clarity. Clarity is so important. Just by staying rational or practicing empathy.
And staying focused on the facts, like how long of a drive did she have to do?
Who, if anyone, is in the car with her?
Were they going to help her drive?
Right. So if they did, she would be less fatigued. If she was alone, she's going to be more fatigued.
They talked her ear off and she never got to sleep.
Possible. Yeah. What are her plans when she arrives home? Was that ever covered in the texting or the messaging?
Does he even know what truly her plans are?
Right. And what's the expected time frame she'd be contacting him after arriving home? Now, here's another thing that brings up here. If he never had that discussion with her before, he set himself up for failure because he's dealing with ambiguity. And the brain naturally will try to fill the holes, the ambiguous holes, with immaculate perceptions, prediction errors, increases anxiety, moves you quicker to flood. Everything about that is a lack of clarity and a lack of pre-planning.
Okay, what are other things Bobby could do using his rational brain? If the time comes and goes without Brenda reaching out,
Well, times and
which it
goes that
did.
his perception of
Right.
times and goes.
a text would solve the unknown. Or if she doesn't even respond to that, he could call her mother and check
Right.
in. The entire trigger to flood pathway is avoidable.
The key point's that Bobby can't change the trigger or cue part. It happened. The car was there. He had a conversation. What he also can't change in the moment are his shadows, but what he can change is how he addresses
His response.
things that come up, right? So her car's there. He can only change his reaction or response, and he gets to choose. And by the way, when he goes to flooded, it's a choice. Just like addiction's a disease of choice.
So we talk about like one of the things to really work on so that you don't go trigger to flood is that false narrative. But there is a way without addressing all of it to recognize it as a choice and put those things on hold. Leave an open space for others around you to not influencing while you're working on those false narratives.
Okay, so let's just say it's husband and wife for a second. And let's just say you have a tendency to really frustrate me, which notice the cognitive distortion in that very statement. What if I spent 10 minutes and wrote down what it is you do that frustrates me and then empathetically address everyone? Okay, how am I now that I understand why Sherry's doing X and Y and Z, which I've done, how do I not let Sherry control me? Because basically what happened in all those years when I would go into my own trigger to flood is I was turning over my happiness, joy, and well-being to you and my perception of what you should or should be doing. Mm-hmm. That's codependence, guys. Yeah. That's an addiction. And I chose that addiction, but I was unconsciously incompetent. I didn't know what I didn't know.
I guess what I'm saying is that you can be consciously incompetent and still, by raising just your awareness, knowing that you have things to work on, there's a point, if you're not in a total PTSD,
right,
that you can go to use your rational brain at a higher level without having to say, okay, I have to process every bit of drama in my life.
And that's first half to second half.
Yeah.
Consciously incompetent to consciously competent. So on cue and just after dinner, as we told you, Brenda called Bobby to wish him Merry Christmas and invite him over to meet her grandparents who arrived that afternoon.
So a response is nothing more than a well-formulated habit that produces positive results, whereas a reaction is based on emotional trigger that often produces the exact opposite result desired, which is collusion. When we react, we often engage in negative self-talk and create a victim or villain situation, and we end up flooded.
So let's go over the 4 options of being flooded. We've talked about them before: fight, flight, freeze, or faint. Fight means you assess, accurately or not, the menace is something over which you potentially have the power to defeat. So you're going to go into fight mode. The hormones released from the sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline, prime you for battle. It manifested in the following: anger, yelling, rage, aggression, controlling, manipulating, rigidity.
Yeah, or you can jump into the victim trap and play the role of a persecutor in a manner that requires you to be superior, right, smarter, stronger, and offer punishment.
That's the engineer type mindset that they go to, but they do it calmly, or what appears calm.
Right, but they're going to punish you.
Right. Blaming, shaming, denying. This is also gaslighting. This happens in a gaslighting relationship, and it's always someone else's fault. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's do flight.
Flight is viewing the antagonist as too powerful to overcome. It's an instantaneous ramping up of an emergency of biochemicals that allow you to escape. That could result in isolation, moving away from people and loved ones. Poor me, powerless, hopeless, helpless, overwhelmed.
Okay, stop for a second.
Victim.
I want to differentiate between isolation and insulation. I've been teaching some of my clients how to insulate. Insulate is different than isolate. In an insulation, you're simply rejuvenating. In an isolation, you're medicating.
And you have to apply boundaries to insulate sometimes?
The only way you can insulate is with boundaries.
Yeah, that's where mothers of toddlers go into the bathroom and hide for an hour.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's and back to flight. It's pretended civility. Oh, I was so good at this. Pretended to be nice.
Yeah. That just means you stop talking.
I was such a jerk. I look at that and I want to cold cock myself. Just bam. Pretended civility with a hostile inner fire that drives the victim mindset. And this is what I'm saying about these engineers who can be calm about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's an internal justification and contrived narratives about the story, bringing in past biases to prove you've been wronged, or vice versa. You can just prove that they've done wrong. That also happens.
Yeah. It's interesting when you get in an argument how all those past stories and you said whatever said.
It's grudge holding, and you're never at fault.
Now, the next one is freeze. And I think this is one that is honestly probably more prevalent. It's perceiving the situation as dire with no potential for a defense. That's irrational, right? It is self-paralyzing.
But that happens when you get raped.
Yes.
That's normal.
Well, it's a protective.
But that's rational.
It's a protective. I mean, yeah. I will say freeze is often used by women.
Yeah.
It's a protective self-defense.
If you look at it, though, it's typically used, however, by children. It often gets brought into adulthood, but it's mostly done by children, and it's very prevalent when a woman gets raped. It's an out-of-body experience when she's sexually abused. I just watched the four-segment documentary on Jeffrey Epstein, and many of those women that were sexually abused they'd freeze.
Yeah, well, and I know I can list people close to us right now who experiences a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, like to the point that they can't function in their life. And when you have a sister that is in this state all the time, there's panic, horror, dread, physical, emotional, mental immobilization. You can't move forward. Fear and terror so intense, you numb out. The biochemicals of endorphins are used to block the pain as an analgesic.
And as mentioned,
I have seen it in children in classrooms, which looks like learned helplessness, but they're actually in a freeze state.
That's really well said.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's more common in children than adults, it's based on physical and sexual abuse. But if they do manifest it as children, they often bring it forth into adulthood.
And then there's faint, perceiving a situation so overwhelming they actually pass out. Now, I have to bring this up because it reminds me of my dad. My dad, like, he was the master of control.
Or so he perceived.
And he had a trigger in his life, and that was going to doctor's offices or even the smell. I remember being with him in the elevator, going with him to an appointment. I can't remember if it was doctor or dentist. And, like, your office is next to a dentist's office, and I smelled the smell. Whatever disinfectants they use, it's different than anything you can buy on the grocery store shelf, and it has its own peculiar smell. But when my dad, the elevator opened up and he smelled the smell, down he went, fainted at the smell of doctor or dentist's office because he absolutely hated it so much.
I wonder what happened to him. I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, I really don't know. My mom and I, we were always just so perplexed. Like, you're this big, strong man. You do all these great things.
you crumble.
Have motorcycles and fly airplanes, and you do this and that and that. And like, you're fearless. And then you smell a doctor's office, and bam, there you go.
Oh, you got to admit that's
the best
funny.
Example I can think
Okay. Case study number 2, expectation A and expectation B. We're telling you the story of a married couple, Martha and Mike. Here's how it starts. What's so hard about picking up your mess? Martha asked her husband as she stepped over his hoodie and socks that were strewn between the dresser and the bathroom. Mike shrugged his shoulders, wondering if Martha would ever stop nagging him about leaving his clothes on the floor.
Oh, this hits home, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's why I'm laughing. He always picks them up eventually, but rarely in her time frame, which is her immaculate perception.
So true. Well, Martha's frustration stems from her unmet expectations that Mike will suddenly realize his faulty habits and make a remarkable transformation that meets or exceeds her perceived behavior patterns. You know, they've been married 17 years with no change in his habits on the horizon. Oh, perhaps if she just nags him one more time, he'll see the light and get on his knees and beg for more nagging.
So this is my color commentary.